My name is Elena Vance. I'm 49 years old, and today I became the general erased from my own father's headstone. They think they've buried his legacy, but they have no idea what he truly left in my hands. Driving to Arlington in my dress blues, a foolish hope had lodged itself in my throat. The hope that this time, after a decade of silent sacrifice, they would finally see me. But as I stood before the cold, white marble, my name deliberately carved out, I heard my mother's voice, a blade of ice in the November air. "That whole soldier business of hers," she whispered to a guest. Frankly, it was a stain on the family name. A stain. The word hit me not like a sound, but like a physical blow. The world went silent, my blood turning as cold as the stone in front of me. I couldn't breathe. Have you ever been made to feel invisible by the very people who should have seen you first? Tell me your story, and stay with me as I begin to unravel the lifetime of lies that led to this one unbearable moment. The November sky over Arlington was a flat sheet of metal, the wind biting with the chill of the Potomac. As the initial shock subsided, my training took over, encasing the raw wound in ice. I stood apart from the crowd, a solitary figure in a sea of decorated uniforms and dark, expensive wool coats. My own dress blues were bare, my highest commendations locked away in classified files, my service a ghost story whispered only in the halls of the Pentagon. In front of me, my family, the powerful Vance dynasty of Washington, D.C., played their parts to perfection. My brother, Senator Michael Vance, delivered the eulogy. His voice, practiced for the Senate floor, resonated with a flawless performance of grief. He spoke of our father, General Robert Vance, as a titan who had molded a United States senator and a devoted daughter, Laura. He gestured to my younger sister, who stood beside him, then back to himself. He never once glanced in my direction. In the official story of my father's life, I did not exist. The honor guard fired the 21-gun salute, the cracks echoing across the hallowed grounds. For everyone else, it was a tribute. For me, each shot was the sound of a nail being hammered into my own coffin. They were burying a hero, and in the same breath, they were burying me alongside him, under a headstone that denied my very name. After the ceremony, as the politicians and their aides began to disperse, I finally allowed myself to approach the grave. The words were so final, so absolute in their exclusion. "In loving memory of Robert Vance, beloved father of Michael and Laura." The coldness of my mother's earlier remark, a stain on the family name, still echoed in my ears, more painful than any physical injury I had ever sustained on the battlefield. It wasn't meant to wound, it was meant to erase. My military discipline screamed at me to maintain composure, to lock my spine, to retreat in an orderly fashion. But my body refused to obey. I was frozen, a statue of a soldier no one wanted. Just as I was about to turn and dissolve back into the shadows, a voice cut through the muted conversations like a signal flare. It was sharp, disciplined, and utterly familiar. "Lieutenant General Elena Vance is present." Major Eva Rostova, my former aide-de-camp, stood at perfect attention. Her gaze fixed forward, her voice ringing with the authority of military protocol. The air crackled, heads turned, the quiet murmuring of the powerful ceased. Generals, congressmen, and their families all looked at me, truly looked for the first time all day. Rostova's declaration wasn't a social introduction. It was a formal, undeniable statement of fact. It transformed my silent suffering from an act of submission into an act of accusation. For the first time in my life, I saw a crack in my mother's porcelain composure. I saw raw, unfiltered shock, and in Michael's eyes a flash of pure fury, quickly masked by his political poise. They had lost control, fueled by that single, profound act of loyalty. I felt something shift inside me. The ice in my veins began to thaw, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I took a deep breath, straightened my back, and marched forward. I walked past my brother and my mother, forcing them to step aside. I stood before my father's grave, my posture erect, and brought my hand up in a slow, precise salute. It was a private farewell, a final report to my commanding officer, an honor they could not take from me. As I turned to leave, a frantic, trembling hand grabbed my wrist. It was Laura, her eyes swimming with guilt and tears. She pressed a cold piece of metal into my palm, her fingers closing mine around it. "This was Dad's," she whispered, her voice barely audible, terrified of being overheard. "Check his office, the oak box under the desk. He left something for you." Her eyes darted toward Michael. "Don't let him know." She pulled her hand back, as if burned, and disappeared into the crowd. I opened my palm. A single, old-fashioned key lay there. It was small and unassuming, but in that moment, it felt like the most powerful weapon in the world. An anchor in the storm, and the first clue in the war that had just been declared. The key Laura had given me felt heavy in my pocket, a small weight of truth in a world of suffocating lies. The Vance residence in Georgetown greeted me not as a home, but as a museum to a life I was never truly a part of. The air was thick with the sterile scent of lemon polish and the funereal perfume of white lilies, a combination my mother Cynthia favored. It was the smell of flawless presentation, of deep-seated rot hidden beneath a perfect gleaming surface. Ignoring the grand staircase and the portraits of my ancestors, staring down with cold, judging eyes, I walked straight to my father's study. I hadn't been allowed in here since I was a teenager, after I'd announced my intention to apply to West Point. Mother had called it a vulgar ambition and declared the study off-limits, as if my mere presence would contaminate this masculine sanctuary of power. The old key turned in the lock with a quiet, satisfying click. The heavy oak door swung inward, releasing a breath of time held captive. The air inside was different. It smelled of my father, of old leather from his armchair, of aging paper from his countless books, of the faint, sweet aroma of the pipe tobacco he'd secretly smoke when he thought no one was looking. On the walls hung maps of campaigns I had only read about in classified briefings. Photos of him with presidents, with world leaders, with men whose names were etched into the bedrock of American history. This room was his soul. It was a world my mother, with her society galas, and my brother, with his political maneuvering, could never truly enter. It was also the world they had worked so hard to keep me from. I got down on my knees, the disciplined movement of a soldier, and reached under the massive mahogany desk. My fingers brushed against the cool, familiar grain of the oak box Laura had mentioned. It was covered in a thin film of dust, a testament to how long it had been hidden, forgotten by everyone but the man who put it there. With a surge of adrenaline, I lifted it onto the desk. The lid creaked open, and inside, my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't money or state secrets. It was a treasure trove of anguish. Dozens of letters, handwritten on his personal stationery, were bundled neatly with a simple string. They were all addressed to me, letters written over a decade, but never sent. My hands trembled as I untied the string and picked up the first one. His familiar, strong handwriting blurred through the tears that instantly welled in my eyes. He wrote about his pride, a quiet, profound pride he was never allowed to express. One letter, dated 3 years ago, made a single tear fall and splash onto the yellowed page. "My dearest Elena," it read, "I received the after-action report for Operation Sandviper today. I knew it was you. The sheer audacity of that flanking maneuver, the precision of the strike. It had your signature all over it. I wanted to call you, to hear your voice. But your mother insisted. She said a father's sentimentality is a weakness a soldier cannot afford, and that I would only distract you from your duty." He hadn't forgotten me. He had been silenced. The pain of that realization was sharp, a different kind of wound from the public humiliation at the cemetery. This was the agony of a love that had been there all along, but had been intercepted, censored by the very woman who should have nurtured it. My mind plunged back to a Christmas morning years ago. We were all gathered by the massive stone fireplace, the fire crackling merrily, a picture-perfect family scene. Michael, home from Harvard Law, was presented with our grandfather's Patek Philippe watch. "This," my father had said, his voice full of gravity, "is for the head of the next generation." Then it was my turn. I had just returned from a brutal training exercise in the Mojave Desert, my muscles still aching. My mother handed me a crisp envelope. Inside was a check. "Buy yourself something feminine, dear," she'd said with a brittle smile. "You can't wear those dreadful combat boots forever." I remember looking at the gleaming, intricate watch on Michael's wrist, a symbol of legacy and belonging, and then at the cold, impersonal check in my hand. He was given a heritage. I was given a transaction, a way to keep me placated and at a distance. I was a warrior who bled for our country, but in their eyes I was not an heir. Shaking myself from the memory, my gaze swept across my father's bookshelf, a library of military history and political biography. My eyes landed on a worn, leather-bound collection of the works of Abraham Lincoln, its spine softened from countless readings. My father had revered Lincoln. He'd once told me, in a rare moment of shared quiet, "Almost all men can stand adversity, but if you want to test a man's character, give him power." He had been talking about Michael, I realized now. He had seen the rot setting in long ago. My fingers traced another quote he had underlined in the book, a quote that now felt like a direct order from the grave. "Character is like a tree, and reputation like its shadow. The shadow is what we think of it. The tree is the real thing." My mother and brother had spent their lives cultivating a reputation, a flawless shadow. But I, the disinherited daughter, the stain on the family name, had been forged in fire to be the tree. In the hallowed silence of my father's study, surrounded by his unspoken love and his unheeded warnings, a cold, hard certainty took root in my soul. They would not define me by the shadow they cast. I would show them what the real thing was made of. I was still holding one of my father's unsent letters, the paper warm from my touch, when the study door creaked open. The scent of my mother's Chanel No. 5 preceded her, a cloying fragrance that always felt more like armor than perfume. She stood in the doorway, her face a mask of rigid disapproval. "What are you doing in here? This is your father's private space," she said. Her tone wasn't one of a concerned mother, but of a museum curator finding a tourist in a roped-off exhibit. My voice trembled as I held up the letter. "Why?" I asked, the single word loaded with a decade of pain. "Why would you stop him from sending these?" She looked at the letter, then at me, her eyes as cold and hard as diamonds. "Because it was necessary," she stated, as if discussing a business decision. Your career, Elena, was a potential liability. The media attention, the constant risk. It could have destroyed Michael's political career, everything your father and I built. This family needs a unified image, not some rogue hero. She spat the word hero, with a quiet, dismissive venom that cut deeper than any shout. That wasn't protection, I countered, my voice low and guttural. That was abandonment. You took my father from me while he was still alive. She simply shrugged, a small, elegant gesture of complete indifference. You must learn to make sacrifices for the greater good, Elena. It's a lesson you should have learned long ago. After she left, leaving only the scent of her perfume and the chill of her words behind, I sank into my father's leather armchair, feeling utterly defeated. The grief was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest. I mechanically began placing the letters back in the oak box, my hands shaking. That's when my fingers brushed against something different. At the very bottom, beneath the last letter, was an official Department of Defense envelope. Its seal faded with time. My heart began to pound against my ribs, a frantic, desperate drumbeat. I tore it open. Inside was a single document. Memorandum for the record. Transfer of command, Operation Stone Aegis. The recipient line read, Lieutenant General Elena Vance. The date was August 2020. It was undeniable proof. My father had not only been proud of me, he had officially chosen me as his successor for a top-secret counter-terrorism and intelligence operation. But it was the signature block at the bottom that made the air leave my lungs. There were two signatures. The first, bold and familiar, was that of General Robert Vance. The second, neat and precise, under the line for Senate Oversight Committee review, was that of Senator Michael Vance. My brother, he knew he had signed off on it, and then he had buried it. The world tilted on its axis. This was no longer a story of a mother's cruel favoritism or a family's embarrassment. This was a calculated act of betrayal, a conspiracy orchestrated by the one person I had protected from schoolyard bullies, the person whose ambitions I had always, from a distance, respected. He hadn't just stolen my legacy, he had stolen my command, my honor, and in doing so, had potentially compromised national security for his own gain. I stared at his signature, so clean and confident. Every stroke of the pen was a separate, deliberate stab in the back. The sorrow in my heart froze, hardening into a glacier of pure, cold rage. I had fought enemies across the globe, but the most dangerous one of all was sitting in the U.S. Senate, sharing my blood. In that moment of icy clarity, a vibration startled me. It came from the secure satellite phone I always carried, a device that had been silent for years. My hands were still shaking as I pulled it from my pocket. A single encrypted text message glowed on the screen. It was from a number I knew by heart, Major Rostova's. Ma'am, a ping on the old network. Your credentials just went from decommissioned to active. Someone is stirring the pot. Advise we meet. Diner off Route 1, Quantico. 0600. The short, cryptic military jargon was a lifeline. It was a signal fire in the dark. I wasn't alone. And somewhere, someone had just reactivated the very credentials my brother had tried so hard to erase. The battle wasn't over. It had just begun. I carefully folded the memorandum, the secret weapon my father had left me, and placed it securely in an inner pocket. I would go to Quantico, I would meet Rostova, and I would take back everything they had stolen from me. The drive down I-95 to Quantico before dawn was a transition between two worlds. I left behind the cold, silent grandeur of Georgetown, a place of power plays and whispered betrayals, and headed toward the familiar, unpretentious landscape of a military town. The Semper Fi Diner, just outside the main gate of the Marine Corps base, was an institution. It was a place blessedly free of pretense, where the clatter of plates and the gruff laughter of young Marines were the dominant soundtrack. The air inside was thick with the honest, robust smells of burnt coffee and sizzling bacon, a world away from the cloying scent of my mother's lilies. I chose a booth in the back corner, its red vinyl cracked from years of use, and watched the life of the diner unfold. This was a place of substance, not style. This was real. At 600 sharp, Major Eva Rostova walked in. She was in her camouflage utilities, her expression as serious and focused as ever, but her eyes held a spark of unwavering loyalty that I hadn't seen directed at me in a very long time. She placed a ruggedized military laptop on the table with a quiet thud and sat down opposite me. There were no flowery greetings, no awkward small talk, just a respectful nod. "Welcome back, General," she said, her voice low and steady. Just those 3 words, spoken with such simple, profound respect for my rank and my position, were worth more than a lifetime of the hollow pleasantries I had endured at my family's estate. In that moment, surrounded by the comfortable chaos of the diner, I felt a sense of belonging that the opulent Vance mansion could never provide. This, among soldiers, was where I was home. Rostova looked me straight in the eye, her gaze unflinching. "Ma'am, there's something I have to say. My years serving under your command were the proudest of my career. You taught all of us what real leadership is, what honor actually means. When they scrubbed your name from the official reports, the entire unit was furious. We weren't allowed to speak up, but we never forgot. You were and are our commander." Her words were direct, unadorned, and they washed over me like a warm current, thawing the glacier that had formed around my heart. I had never heard anything remotely similar from my own blood. To them, I was a liability, a stain. To Rostova, to my soldiers, I was a leader. For the first time in a decade, I felt something I had long ago given up on. I felt seen. I simply nodded, unable to speak, past the lump forming in my throat. She seemed to understand, giving me a moment before turning to the laptop. She powered it on, the screen glowing in the dim morning light. When your credentials were reactivated, it created a loophole. I was able to access a fragment of the stone Aegis system logs before they shut it down again. "Look at this, ma'am." On the screen was a command line entry, cold and digital. My name, Lieutenant General Elena Vance, had been entered as the succeeding commander, the timestamp matching the date on my father's memorandum perfectly. But just 24 hours later, another entry appeared, a manual override. The originating authority was listed in stark damning text, Oversight Senate M. Vance, Michael. He hadn't just allowed my name to be buried, he had taken the shovel and dug the grave himself. Rostova then pointed to a small attached annotation, a note that made my stomach clench. It read, "Subject non-compliant, high risk, recommend permanent decommissioning." My own brother had not only erased me, he had formally recommended that I be neutralized. A waitress, an older woman with kind eyes and a silver bun, appeared at our table. "What can I get for you girls?" she asked with a warm, genuine smile. I ordered the classic American breakfast, 2 eggs over easy, bacon and white toast. We ate mostly in silence, but it was a comfortable silence, a silence of shared purpose, not of cold distance. It was the silence of 2 soldiers studying a map before a battle. When the check came, I reached for my wallet, but Rostova's hand covered mine. "I've got this, General," she said firmly. "You took care of us for years. It's our turn now." That small gesture, a simple breakfast paid for by a loyal subordinate, held more genuine care and warmth than all the checks my mother had ever written me. In that greasy spoon diner, over a plate of eggs and bacon, I had my first real family meal in 10 years. As she gathered her things, Rostova paused. That note, decommissioning, it was co-signed by Gunnery Sergeant Leo Nash, your former right-hand man. He took an early medical retirement right after. He's the loose end, ma'am. He's the one Michael had to pay off. She looked at me, her promise clear. "I'll find him, General. Wherever he is, I'll find him." I had traded the Georgetown mansion for a sterile motel room off Route 1, a cheap place smelling faintly of disinfectant and stale smoke. It was here, surrounded by the digital ghosts of Michael's conspiracy on Rostova's laptop screen, that my phone rang. Michael's name flashed on the screen, a name that now felt foreign and hostile. I let it ring twice, a small act of defiance, before answering. "Elena," his voice was sickeningly smooth, the practiced warmth of a politician canvassing for votes. It was the same tone he used when charming donors and kissing babies. "I heard you put on quite a show at Arlington. Mother is very upset. Why are you doing this? We're a family." I said nothing, letting the silence stretch, forcing him to fill the void. The audacity of him invoking the word family after literally erasing me from stone was breathtaking. It was a word he used not as a bond, but as a cage. He continued, undeterred by my silence. "Look, I know you're hurting. Of course you are. But let's be rational. Come home. I can arrange an honorary advisory position at the DoD. A prestigious title, good salary, low stress, something respectable. It's what Dad would have wanted, for us to be united, for you to be taken care of." A wave of nausea rolled over me. He wasn't offering reconciliation, he was offering a bribe, packaged as concern. A comfortable, gilded cage to keep me silent and sidelined. A pension for my erased career. "I don't need your pity, Michael," I said, my voice colder than I intended. "I need the truth." He laughed, a dry, humorless sound that scraped against my ear. "The truth? Dear sister, in this city, the truth is whatever those in power decide it is. And you are not in power." He hung up. The call left a bitter taste in my mouth, but it also crystallized my resolve into something hard and sharp. If Michael thought a cushy desk job could buy my silence, he had severely underestimated the sister he'd spent a lifetime ignoring. "He's scared," Rostova said, looking up from her laptop, her expression grim. "And we're about to find out why." We dug deeper, following the scent of money. Rostova's fingers flew across the keyboard, her intelligence tradecraft a thing of beauty. We focused on a political action committee he'd established, the Vance Foundation for Veterans. On the surface, it was a noble cause, its website filled with pictures of Michael, shaking hands with wounded warriors. But when Rostova bypassed the firewalls and cracked the encrypted ledgers, the noble facade crumbled. Millions of dollars, donated in good faith by patriotic Americans, were being systematically funneled from the pass into an offshore shell corporation with a deliberately untraceable name. The authorizing signature on every single transfer was Michael Vance. Rostova cross-referenced the dates of the transactions against personnel files. "General, look at this." She pointed to a massive transfer over $2 million. "This transaction is dated the exact day Gunnery Sergeant Leo Nash took his sudden medical retirement and vanished. Nash, my former right hand, the man who knew the operational details of Stone Aegis better than anyone besides me. The picture was sickeningly clear. Michael hadn't just erased me. He had paid Nash to disappear, buying his silence with money meant for the very veterans our family was supposed to honor. A sharp, authoritative knock on the motel room door startled us both. I opened it to find my mother standing there. I had no idea how she found me. Cynthia Vance stood on the concrete walkway, her tailored designer suit and understated pearls looking absurdly out of place against the backdrop of peeling paint and highway noise. She didn't step inside, just stood at the threshold, as if crossing it would contaminate her Christian Louboutin heels. "Michael told me," she began, her voice tight with controlled fury. "You are making foolish, destructive choices, Elena. You are tearing this family apart." The familiar script of blame began, one I had heard in different forms my whole life. "Do you have any idea what your father sacrificed so Michael could reach his position? The compromises, the alliances, you are spitting on his legacy, all because of your own selfishness." I stared at her, the woman who had birthed me, and felt nothing but a vast, empty chasm between us. "Selfishness?" I echoed. "I only want the honor my father bestowed upon me." She shook her head, a faint, contemptuous smile touching her lips. "Honor? Your honor, Elena, lies in silence and knowing your place. Do not push this any further. You have no idea who you are dealing with." It wasn't advice, it was a threat, delivered with the icy precision of a seasoned Washington player. She turned without another word and walked back to her waiting black town car. The confrontation with my mother confirmed I needed leverage, and I needed it from the inside. I contacted Laura, arranging a meeting at a quiet, discreet coffee shop in DuPont Circle, far from the watchful eyes of my brother's staff. Laura looked haggard when she arrived, her eyes puffy and red-rimmed, her hands trembling as she wrapped them around her latte. "I'm so sorry, Elena," she whispered, tears welling up instantly. "I heard them, Mother and Michael. They aren't just trying to keep your career hidden. They're terrified you'll uncover something about Operation Stone Aegis, something about the money." She admitted she had seen Michael take a strange USB drive from Dad's study just days before he passed away, after a heated argument with him. "I think he hid it back in Dad's closet, inside one of his old field jackets. I was too scared to get it myself." "Michael. He scares me now, Elena. He's not the brother we grew up with." Laura's confession, though delivered in fearful whispers, gave me my next objective. This was bigger than my career. It was about corruption and treason, all under the cover of my father's name. I had to get that USB. It was the key to dismantling the empire of lies Michael had built on the ashes of my service. Michael's invitation came 2 days later. He asked me to attend the annual fundraising gala for the Vance Foundation for Veterans, held in the opulent ballroom of the Hay Adams Hotel, with its panoramic view of the White House. "It's a chance for our family to show a united front," he'd said, his voice oozing with a sincerity that I now knew was pure performance. Against my better judgment, a small, foolish part of me, the part that still yearned for a family that never was, agreed to go. I chose a simple, elegant black gown, a stark contrast to the glittering sea of designer dresses and jewels. I felt like a foreign operative on a reconnaissance mission, gathering intelligence in hostile territory. As predicted, my presence was an exercise in calculated invisibility. Michael introduced me to a senator with a dismissive wave of his hand. "This is my sister, Elena." No rank, no title, just a name, stripped of all its meaning, all its sacrifice. Throughout the evening, my mother drifted by periodically, a ghost in couture, whispering poison into my ear. You see, Elena, this is our world, the world of influence, of importance. Forget that messy business with the military and come home. This is where you belong. It was a gilded cage, and she was rattling the bars, trying to lure me inside with the promise of acceptance. The evening culminated in a charity auction. The auctioneer, a man with a booming voice and a plastic smile, was rattling off bids for extravagant vacation packages and rare wines. Then came the final item. And now, ladies and gentlemen, a truly unique piece from the personal collection of the Vance family, he announced, the display case of the late, great General Robert Vance, which once held his Medal of Honor, now repurposed to hold the treasured childhood mementos of his beloved youngest daughter, Laura Vance. The air was sucked from my lungs. On the stage, under the spotlight, was my childhood. My small wooden box, the one I had kept under my bed, the one that held my most precious possessions, faded photos of my father and me before he became a famous general, a worn-out rag doll, and most importantly, the small brass compass he had given me when I was 10. So you'll always find your way home, he had said. They hadn't just erased my name from his headstone. They were auctioning off my history, replacing my identity with Laura's, rewriting the past to fit their perfect narrative. And Michael, my brother, stood on that stage, smiling proudly, as if this desecration were a noble act of charity. I couldn't breathe. The polite applause of the crowd sounded like roaring in my ears. I turned and fled the ballroom, bursting out onto the cold balcony overlooking Lafayette Square. The frigid Washington night air did nothing to cool the inferno raging inside me. I had endured the dismissiveness, the neglect, the quiet betrayals. But this public auctioning of my soul, was a declaration of war. I gripped the cold iron railing, feeling utterly and completely alone, a ghost haunting my own life. In that moment of absolute despair, a verse my mother used to read to me before she decided my faith was as inconvenient as my career echoed in my mind. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. I was no longer walking through the valley. I was the valley, I was the shadow, and I was done fearing evil. I was about to become it. The time for defense was over. I pulled out my secure phone, my fingers steady and sure. I sent an encrypted message to Rostova, 2 words, commence operations now. I turned to walk back inside, my face a mask of cold fury. Michael intercepted me at the door, his smile faltering as he saw my expression. "Where are you going? You'll make a scene," he hissed, his voice an authoritative command. I looked directly into his eyes, and for the first time, I saw him for what he was, not my brother, but the enemy. "I'm going to get back what's mine," I said, my voice eerily calm. "You and Mother should enjoy the rest of your evening. It will be your last peaceful one for a very long time." The smug confidence vanished from his face, replaced by a flicker of genuine fear. He saw something in my eyes he had never seen before, not pain, not submission, but the cold, hard resolve of a general about to launch an all-out assault. I turned my back on him and walked away, leaving him standing alone in the glittering, hollow world he had built. What was the final straw for you? The one moment that made you say, "Enough is enough"? Share that moment of courage in the comments below. The flimsy walls of the motel room seemed to fade away, replaced by the familiar, focused atmosphere of a tactical operations center. The cheap bedspread became our planning table, covered with a satellite map of the Vance estate that Rostova had procured. Dressed in tactical black from head to toe, I felt the familiar adrenaline begin to course through my veins. Not the hot, chaotic anger from the gala, but a cold, clean fire of pure purpose. This was my element. Grief and betrayal were foreign territories, but this, a mission, a target, a plan, this was home. "Talk to me, Rostova," I said, my voice crisp. "The estate's security system is civilian grade, but top of the line," she reported, her fingers flying across the keys of her ruggedized laptop. 4 peripheral cameras covering the main approaches, 2 motion sensors in the downstairs central hallway. Standard stuff. But Michael got arrogant. She pointed to a section on the map. The West Wing. It's the old part of the house, where the servants' quarters used to be. The wiring for the alarm system there is outdated, and there's a single blind spot. A window to an old storage room on the ground floor. He's a senator living in one of the most secure neighborhoods in D.C. The last thing he expects is a Black Ops-style infiltration from his own sister. I nodded, a grim smile touching my lips. I remembered my father quoting General Patton, "Prepare for the unknown by studying how others in the past have coped with the unforeseeable and the unpredictable." Michael had planned for every political contingency, every media attack. He never planned for me. Under the cloak of a moonless D.C. night, I moved through the manicured gardens of my childhood home like a ghost. Every shadow was an ally, every rustle of leaves a potential threat I had already accounted for. Through a small, secure earpiece, Rostova was my eyes and ears. 2 minutes until the private security patrol passes your position. You're clear. I reached the blind spot, the storage room window. A quick, practiced move with a specialized tool, and the lock disengaged with a barely audible click. I slipped inside, landing silently on the dusty floor. The air was thick with the scent of mothballs and forgotten memories. I navigated the darkened hallways, my steps silent on the polished hardwood floors where I once ran as a child. Every creak of the old house was a ghost whispering in my ear. This home, once a symbol of both comfort and pain, was now simply enemy territory, a battlefield. I reached my father's walk-in closet, a space larger than my entire motel room. Laura's tip had been a gamble, but it was the only one I had. I ran my hands through the rows of his old uniforms and tweed jackets, the scent of his cologne still faintly clinging to the fabric. My fingers searched the lining of an old Marine Corps field jacket, one he wore on maneuvers long ago. And then I felt it, a small, hard rectangle sewn deep into an inner pocket, the USB drive. Objective secured. Back in the anonymous safety of the motel, the real battle began. I plugged the USB into Rostova's heavily encrypted laptop. It was a single password-protected file, Contingency V. It took Rostova less than a minute to bypass the encryption. What appeared on the screen was not just a plan, it was a character assassination, drafted with the cold, methodical precision of a corporate takeover. It was Michael's playbook to systematically destroy me. Step 1. Leak falsified psychiatric evaluations to key military contacts, suggesting I suffered from severe, undiagnosed PTSD. Step 2. Use his oversight authority to reroute intelligence reports, minimizing my successes and exaggerating minor operational frictions. Step 3. Formally petition to have me honorably but permanently decommissioned, citing concerns for my mental stability and the integrity of Operation Stone Aegis. But the final page, the final directive, was what made the blood in my veins run cold. It was a single sentence, highlighted in red, a command to an unknown subordinate. Neutralize V before Phase 4 commences. All means necessary. Neutralize. In the world I came from, that word was a chilling euphemism. It didn't just mean to remove from a post. It could mean to remove from the board entirely, permanently. This was no longer just about my career, my honor, or my father's legacy. My brother had, in writing, sanctioned my death. Phase 4, I said, my voice a strained whisper. What is Phase 4, Rostova? Her fingers danced across the keyboard again, her face illuminated by the screen's glow. It's buried deep, ma'am, but I'm getting fragments. It looks like an illicit arms deal. Michael is using the logistics and cover of Stone Aegis to facilitate the sale of advanced weaponry to an unsanctioned foreign power. The money trail from the pack, the shell corporations, it all leads here. He isn't just burying your father's legacy, he's using it as a shield to commit treason. Everything clicked into place. The lies, the money, the secrecy. The reason he couldn't afford to have me in command. But a digital file, no matter how damning, could be dismissed as a fabrication. I needed a human source, a voice of unimpeachable integrity. There's only one person, I said, the decision forming as I spoke. Only one person Dad trusted enough to see the whole picture. I looked at Rostova, my expression hard as steel. Find me Colonel Frank Gallagher, retired. He was my father's best friend, his confidant. Find him now. This battle needed more than a thumb drive. It needed a soul. It needed a voice of truth. The directive I gave Rostova was simple. Find Colonel Frank Gallagher. Within hours, she had a location. He was living off the grid, tucked away in a small log cabin, deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. It was a classic move for a career soldier weary of the world, trading the suffocating politics of Washington for the clean, quiet embrace of nature. The drive took hours, the sleek highways of the D.C. Beltway giving way to winding country roads. The air grew cooler, cleaner, smelling of pine and damp earth, as I climbed higher into the mountains, forests ablaze with the fiery colors of late autumn. The oppressive tension that had coiled in my shoulders for days began to loosen, just slightly. This was a world away from the lies and ambition that had defined my life. I found his cabin exactly as Rostova had described it, a plume of smoke rising from a stone chimney, a clear, fast-running stream nearby. And there, standing midstream in a pair of waders, was Frank Gallagher. His arm moved with the fluid, practiced grace of an expert fly fisherman, casting his line into the churning water. He was my father's closest friend, the man he trusted more than anyone, including his own son. If the truth still existed somewhere on this earth, it was with him. He saw my car pull up and slowly reeled in his line, his movements deliberate and weary. He didn't seem surprised, just resigned. As he trudged out of the water, I saw that the years had been hard on him. His face was a roadmap of worry, his shoulders slumped with a weight that had nothing to do with age. "Elena," he said, his voice raspy, "I've been wondering when you'd find your way up here." Inside his cabin, the air smelled of wood smoke and old books. We sat in worn leather armchairs by a crackling fire, a bottle of fine Kentucky bourbon on the table between us, the same kind he and my father used to share. I laid out the facts, my voice calm and measured, presenting the case as I would in a briefing. He listened in silence, staring into the flames, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. But when I asked him about Stone Aegis, about Michael's involvement, a wall went up. "That's all in the past, Elena," he said, his gaze shifting away from mine. "Your father is gone. Let it rest." A cold knot of despair tightened in my stomach. Not him, not Frank. If even he, the most honorable man I knew besides my father, had chosen silence, then I truly was alone. "Rest?" I shot back, my voice sharp with disbelief. "How can he rest, Frank? They erased my name from his gravestone. They auctioned off my childhood for charity. My brother is using our father's legacy as a cover for treason. That's not rest, that's desecration." My words hung in the air between us. He let out a long, shuddering sigh, the sound of a man defeated. I pressed my advantage, placing the transfer of command memorandum on the table. The one with Michael's signature. Frank stared at it, his knuckles white as he gripped his glass. The wall crumbled. "That son of a bitch," he whispered, the words filled with years of pent-up rage. Finally, he looked at me, his eyes filled with a deep, profound shame. And the story came tumbling out. Years ago, my father's health had begun to fail. In a classified meeting of the Senate Oversight Committee, Michael had shown up, invoking his father's name, claiming to act on his authority. He'd argued that my maverick tendencies and aggressive posture made me a liability. He'd painted a picture of a volatile female general, too emotional to handle the delicate intricacies of stone Aegis. With my father too ill to refute him, Michael had pressured the committee, twisting reports, fabricating concerns, and convincing them that sidelining me was my father's own wish for the stability of the operation. "I fought him on it," Frank said, his voice thick with regret. "I told them it was bullshit. I told them you were the most capable officer we had. But I was just a colonel, Elena. He was a senator. He was the general's son. They listened to him." The pain of his powerlessness was etched on his face. He had been outmaneuvered in a battle of politics, not principles. "I know my word isn't enough to go against a sitting senator," he continued, his resolve hardening. He stood up and walked over to a heavy, old-fashioned safe in the corner of the room. He worked the combination, the clicks of the dial echoing in the quiet cabin. The heavy door swung open, and he reached inside, pulling out a small, unassuming microcassette tape. "Your father knew what Michael was," Frank said, holding the tape as if it were a sacred relic. "He saw the snake in his own house. He suspected Michael would try something like this. Before that meeting, he gave me this recorder." He looked me in the eye. He told me, "Record everything, Frank, just in case the little bastard crosses a line. I've kept it all these years, torn between my loyalty to your father's memory and my fear of what Michael's power could do. I was a coward, Elena. I chose to hide." He placed the tape in my hand. It was impossibly heavy, weighted with the truth I had been so desperate to find. It was my father's last order, his final contingency plan. "This is it, Elena," Frank said, his voice firm now. "This is Michael's voice, his own words, ordering the committee to remove you from command. It's the weapon your father left for you." I closed my fingers around the small plastic rectangle. This wasn't just evidence, it was validation. It was the voice of my father, reaching out from beyond the grave to arm me for the final fight. The battle could no longer be fought in the shadows of Washington. It had to be brought into the light. Holding the cassette tape from Gallagher felt like holding a live grenade. The pin was pulled. The only question was where and when to throw it. Fighting Michael within the closed-door systems of the Pentagon or the Senate was a losing battle. He was the master of that universe, and he would use its labyrinthine rules to bury the truth forever. No, the only way to win was to change the battlefield. to drag him out of the shadows and into the one arena he couldn't control, the court of public opinion. His greatest strength, his public image, was about to become his greatest vulnerability. I made the call to David Paxton, a veteran investigative journalist whose primetime news program was legendary for taking down corrupt politicians. "Mr. Paxton, this is Lieutenant General Elena Vance," I said, my voice steady. "I have a story for you, a story about honor, betrayal, and Senator Michael Vance." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line, followed by the palpable excitement of a journalist who knows he's just struck gold. "General," he said, his voice charged with energy, "we'll clear the schedule for you." Before heading to the studio, I stood before the mirror in my motel room. I wasn't wearing my uniform. I was wearing a simple, dark blue dress, professional, serious, and civilian. This wasn't a military operation anymore. This was personal. For years, my family's judgment had been a constant, suffocating weight, making me feel like an outsider in my own skin. I thought of something Eleanor Roosevelt once said, a quote my father had admired. "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." I looked at my own reflection, at the lines of exhaustion and resolve around my eyes. I was done giving my consent. The television studio was cold, a cavern of darkness and blinding lights. Opposite me sat Paxton, his expression a mask of professional neutrality, but his eyes sharp with anticipation. Millions of people were watching. I felt a flicker of the immense vulnerability of what I was about to do, to lay bare my family's deepest shames for the world to see. But then the discipline of 1,000 missions took over. I was calm. I was ready. "General Vance," Paxton began, his voice smooth and practiced, "for 10 years you've been a ghost. Where have you been?" I took a breath and looked directly into the camera lens, speaking not just to Paxton, but to every person watching. "I was serving my country in places that don't appear on any map," I said, my tone clear and firm. "And while I was in the dark, my brother, Senator Michael Vance, was waging a different kind of campaign here in Washington. A campaign to methodically erase my name, my service, and my career from history." With the cold precision of an intelligence briefing, I laid out the facts. I spoke of the nameless headstone, the unsent letters, the transfer of command memo my father had signed, and the chilling contents of the USB drive detailing the plan to neutralize me. I presented myself not as a weeping victim, but as a commanding officer reporting a grave injustice. I was not there for pity. I was there for accountability. Paxton, to his credit, pushed back. "General, these are extraordinary accusations. Senator Vance is one of the most respected men on Capitol Hill." "I know," I replied, my voice unwavering, "which is why I didn't come here with just my word." On my signal, Rostova, who stood off camera, handed Paxton a small digital audio player and a set of headphones. "This is a recording of a classified meeting of the Senate Oversight Committee," I said, my gaze fixed on the camera. "On it, you will hear my brother using our father's failing health as an excuse to order my removal from command, citing my instability as a woman in a high-pressure role." A hush fell over the studio. Paxton put on the headphones. I watched his face as he listened. His professional mask slipped. His eyes widened in disbelief, then narrowed in anger. He pulled the headphones off, his face pale with shock. "My God," he whispered, forgetting for a moment that he was on live television. That's his voice." The interview detonated a political firestorm. The network's phone lines lit up. On social media, the hashtag YourVanceTruth exploded. trending worldwide within minutes. News vans swarmed Michael's office on Capitol Hill. My story was no longer a private pain, it was a national scandal. Moments after the broadcast ended, as I was walking off the set, my secure phone vibrated. A new encrypted message from an unknown number. It was 3 words, "They know, help." My blood ran cold. It was Leo Nash. Michael's network was closing in on him. My media assault had cornered the beast, and now it was lashing out, trying to eliminate the last piece of evidence. I hadn't just started a war of words. I had just triggered a race against time. I immediately called Rostova. "Get a location on Nash, now. We're going to get him out." The rescue of Gunnery Sergeant Leo Nash was a swift, silent operation, executed with the precision of a military raid. With the help of Rostova and 2 retired Marine raiders, loyal to my father's memory, we hit the suburban Maryland safe house just after midnight. Michael's hired muscle were amateurs, easily neutralized. We found Nash in the basement, terrified and chain-smoking, his face pale in the light of a single bare bulb. He didn't hesitate. He thrust a heavy-duty external hard drive into my hands. "It's everything," he stammered, his voice hoarse with fear. The original, unredacted logs for Stone Aegis. Every transfer, every illegal order. He doesn't know I kept a triple redundant copy. With the final, irrefutable piece of evidence in my possession, we were ready for the final battle. We were ready for the Senate. The hearing room for the Senate Armed Services Committee was packed. A standing-room-only theater for the final act of the Vance family drama. The air was thick with anticipation. Michael sat at the witness table, looking every bit the composed, wrongfully accused statesman, his lawyers whispering confidently beside him. I walked in and took my place opposite him. That morning, in a quiet ceremony at the Pentagon, the Secretary of Defense had personally pinned every medal I had earned back onto my dress blues uniform. I was no longer a ghost. I was a 3-star general of the United States Marine Corps, and I had come to reclaim my honor. I began my testimony not with accusations, but with the words from my father's last unsent letter, my voice clear and steady. Then, piece by piece, I built my case. The memorandum, the PAC's financial records, the contingency V plan from the USB drive. And finally, the original, untampered logs from Nash's hard drive, displayed on the large screens for all to see. Michael's defense was predictable and slick. He dismissed everything as the vengeful fantasies of a bitter, unstable sister jealous of his success. He painted me as a woman scorned, lashing out at the family that had tried so hard to protect me. But I had saved the kill shot for last. "I request permission to play one final piece of evidence," I said to the committee chairman. A micro-cassette recording provided by Colonel Frank Gallagher. The audio technician hit play, and through the speakers, my brother's voice filled the silent room, arrogant, dismissive, and utterly damning, as he ordered the committee to sideline me, to bury my career, all in the name of political expediency. Michael's confident smirk evaporated, the color drained from his face. It was in that moment of stunned silence, with all eyes locked on my brother, that the final unexpected blow was struck. "Stop it!" A shrill cry came from the audience. My mother, Cynthia, shot to her feet, her composure utterly shattered. "He did it for this family," she shrieked, her voice cracking, trying desperately to defend her favored son, but instead delivering the coup de grace. "He convinced me Alana's record would destroy your father's legacy, that her career was a liability. I agreed to keep her on the outside." her frantic confession hung in the air, a public testament to the entire conspiracy. The room erupted. Michael stared at her, his face a mask of horror. His carefully constructed world had been brought down not by my evidence, but by the panicked words of the mother who had enabled him. The chairman slammed his gavel, abruptly ending the hearing and immediately calling for a full criminal investigation by the Department of Justice. In the days that followed, the Vance empire crumbled. Federal agents arrested Michael in his Senate office. He didn't resist. His career, his reputation, his entire life was over. Weeks later, I stood on the parade grounds at the Marine Barracks in Washington, D.C. In a formal ceremony, I was publicly reinstated to my full rank and honors. Looking out at the sea of Marines, my Marines, I didn't give a long speech. I said only 5 words. Justice delayed is not justice denied. Rostova, her eyes shining with pride, was the one who personally pinned the 3rd star back onto my collar. Gunnery Sergeant Nash, now a key witness under federal protection, handed me the Distinguished Service Medal I should have received a decade ago. The story concluded as it began in a place of honor, in a quiet corridor of the Pentagon known as the Hall of Heroes. A new photograph was hung. It showed General Robert Vance standing beside his daughter, Lieutenant General Elena Vance. My name was no longer a footnote to be erased. It was a headline. I eventually found my peace, not in Washington, but back in the quiet mountains of Virginia, in a small cabin not far from Frank Gallagher's. I had traded the battlefield for a lecture hall at the Marine Corps War College in Quantico, teaching the next generation about the hardest subject of all, integrity under pressure. One afternoon, a package arrived with no return address. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was the old wooden box from the auction, filled with my childhood memories. There was no note, but I knew it was from Laura. It wasn't an apology, not yet, but it was a start. It was a silent admission of truth. I held the small brass compass my father had given me so long ago. My battle wasn't for revenge. It was a testament, carved in truth, that history is not written by the loudest voices, but by the one who is left standing at the end. As the Bible says in the book of Proverbs, when justice is done, it brings joy to the righteous but terror to evildoers. In the quiet of the mountains, I finally felt that joy. I had found my way home. Finding my way home wasn't about returning to a place, but to myself. This peace was hard-won, built from the ruins of what I thought was my life. My journey to this quiet place was long, and I know I'm not the only one who's had to fight a battle no one else could see. What has your journey toward peace looked like after the storm? This was my story of finding the truth. If you believe in the power of these stories, of resilience, and of fighting for what's right, then join us for more by following the channel and ensure every one of our stories gets heard.